What's up, my fellow Shield Brothers? It's the Shield Brother here with the final episode of the history of the Germanic States. Today, we are going to cover the Cold War era and what that meant for the state of Germany. And thank you so much for staying with me through these 10 episodes. We've traveled through the ages, seen all the different Germanic iterations, different countries, the empires, and I really appreciate you guys sticking around for this. So let's get started for today's episode. So, Germany during the Cold War era, which lasted roughly from 1945 to 1990. So there was the Cold War. Quickly after, World War II. As a consequence of the defeat of Nazi Germany in 1945 and the onset of the Cold War in 1947, the country was split between the two global blocs, the East and the West, a period known as the Division of Germany. Millions of refugees from Central and Eastern Europe would move west, most of them to West Germany. Two countries emerged from this division: West Germany, which was a parliamentary democracy, a NATO member and a founding member of what has since become the European Union, and one of the world's largest economies and is kind of controlled and influenced by the US, while there was East Germany, which was a totalitarian communist dictatorship controlled and influenced by the Soviet Union. That was a satellite of Moscow. With the collapse of communism in 1989, reunion of Western Germany's terms followed. So no one doubted Germany's economic and engineering prowess during this time. The question was how long bitter memories of war would cause Europeans to distrust Germany, and whether Germany could demonstrate it had rejected totalitarianism and militarism and embraced democracy and human rights. So there was a lot of post-war chaos. The total of German dead was 8% to 10% of the pre-war population of 69 million, or between 5.5 million and 7 million people dead. This included 4.5 million in the military and between 1 and 2 million civilians. There was chaos as 11 million foreign workers and POWs left Germany, while 14 million displaced refugees from the East and soldiers returning home came back into Germany. During the Cold War, the West German government estimated a death toll of 2.2 million civilians due to the flight and expulsion of Germans and through forced labor in the Soviet Union. This figure remained unchallenged until the 1990s, when some historians put the death toll at 500,000 to 600,000 confirmed deaths. In 2006, the German government reaffirmed its position that 2 to 2.5 million Germans died due to these conditions. So, occupation zone borders after 1945, Berlin, although within the Soviet zone, was also partitioned into halves among the four powers at first, and then simply just the East and West Berlin. The areas that will be shown will show the division and then the East and West. So, at the Potsdam Conference, Germany was divided into four military occupation zones by the Allies and did not regain independence until 1949. The provinces set east of the order of the Oder and the Ness rivers, those were transferred to Poland and Lithuania, and Russia. The 6.7 million Germans living in Poland and the 2.5 million living in Czechoslovakia were forced to move west, although most of them had already left when the war had ended. Denazification removed, imprisoned, or executed all of the top officials of the old regime, at least that was its goal. But most middle and lower ranks of civilian officialdom and the Nazi regime were not seriously affected. They were just kind of given a slap on the wrist. In accordance with the Allied agreement made at the Yalta the conference in Yalta, millions of POWs were used as forced labor by the Soviet Union and other European countries. In the East, the Soviets crushed dissent and imposed another police state, often employing ex-Nazis into their new dreaded Stasi. The Soviets extracted about 23% of the East German global populace for reparations, while in the West, reparations were a minor account. So, 1945 to 46, housing and food conditions were terrible, and the disruption of transport, markets, and finances slowed the road back to normalcy. In the West, bombing had created such a destroyed housing stock and housing market that over 10 million refugees from the East had crowded into living camps in the West. And there was just an end of large food seized by the occupation nations, and Allied economic policy originally was one of industrial disarmament plus building the agricultural sector to kind of help the Western Germans. And in the western section, most of the industrial plants had minimal bomb damage, and the Allies dismantled 5% of the industrial plants for reparations. However, the deindustrialization became impractical, and the US instead called for a strong industrial base in Germany so it could stimulate European economic recovery. The US shipped food from 1945 to 1947 and made a $600 million loan in 1947 to rebuild the German industry and infrastructure. So, in 1945, the occupying powers took over the newspapers in Germany and purged them of all Nazi influence. The American occupation headquarters, the Office of Military Government, the United States, or the OMGUS, the OMGUS, began its own newspaper based in Munich. It was edited by German and Jewish peoples who had fled to the United States and had been brought back to Germany after the war. So that's kind of where Germany is sitting during this post-war chaos and the beginning of the Cold War. So there was East Germany, first off. Erich Honecker and his guests you can be seen there at the 40th anniversary of the socialist regime in 1989, which did not last much longer after that. But in 1949, the western half of the Soviet zone became the Deutsche Demokratische Republik, or the DDR, the German Democratic Republic, under control of the Socialist Unity Party. Neither country had a significant army, nor the East or the West Germany. Neither one had a significant arms by any means until the 1950s, when they kind of started to rebuild. But East Germany built the Stasi into a powerful secret police that infiltrated every aspect of society within Eastern Germany. East Germany was an Eastern Bloc country, as we stated earlier, under the political and military control and influence of the Soviet Union through her occupation forces and the Warsaw Treaty. Political power was solely executed by leading members of just different communist-controlled socialist unity parties, etc. A Soviet-style command economy was set up to kind of follow the roles and rules of Moscow set in place. While East Germany, there was a lot of propaganda which was based on the benefits of this new socialist regime and how they were really helping to fix East Germany. So Walter Ulbricht was the party boss from 1950 to 1971. In 1933, Ulbricht had fled to Moscow, where he served as a Comintern agent loyal to Stalin. As World War II began to end, Stalin assigned him the job of designing the post-war German system that would centralize all power in the Communist Party. Ulbricht became deputy prime minister in 1949 and secretary, or chief executive of the Socialist Unity Party in the 1950s. Some 2.6 million people had fled East Germany by 1961 when he built the Berlin Wall to stop them from leaving East Germany, shooting those who attempted to cross it, or just simply capturing them. But most of them, if you tried to cross the Berlin Wall to get to West German territory, you were shot. So this was what they called the anti-fascist protective wall, even though there were no fascists. And it was a major embarrassment for the program during the Cold War, but it did stabilize East Germany and postpone its collapse due to the lack of people being able to leave. And Ulbricht lost power in 1971, but was kept on as a nominal head of state. And he was replaced because he failed to solve growing national crises and dissent and the worsening economy from 1969 to 1971. The fear of another popular uprising, as had occurred in 1953, and the disgruntlement between Moscow and Berlin caused Ulbricht's détente policies towards the West. He put these entente policies with, disarmament. He wanted to work with the West, which Moscow hated, obviously. And this led to the transition to Erich Honecker, who would pick up from 1971 to 1989 as party boss. And then his plans were not successful, however, and the dissent kept growing in East Germany's population. I mean, East Germany was simply just the satellite of the Soviet Union. In 1989, the socialist regime collapsed after 40 years, despite its omnipresent secret police, the Stasi. Main reasons for the collapse include several severe economic problems and growing emigration towards the West. East Germany's culture was shaped by communism and particularly Stalinism. It was characterized by, East German propaganda and congested feeling among Germans. They were just not happy. It was a terrible time to be living in the East German territories. But that brings us to West Germany. So, West Germany, in 1949, the three Western occupation zones, which were American, British, and French, were all combined into the Federal Republic of Germany, and the government was formed under Chancellor Konrad Adenauer and his conservative coalition. The coalition was in power during most of the period since 1949. Its capital was Bonn until it was moved to Berlin in 1990. In 1990, the FRG absorbed East Germany and gained full sovereignty over Berlin. At all points, West Germany was much larger and richer and successful than its eastern counterpart, which became a dictatorship under the control of the Communist Party, as we just talked about. Germany, especially Berlin, was a cockpit of the Cold War, with NATO and the Warsaw Pact assembling major military forces in West and East. However, these two giant forces never came to combat. And the Western German territories, Western Germany, was a parliamentary, as we said, and it was very successful. It was due to the help from the Allies, and then its new government put in place thanks to the help from them. It was able to succeed and thrive after this post-war chaos. So there was this thing called the economic miracle in the West. The Volkswagen Beetle was an icon of Western German reconstruction. West Germany enjoyed prolonged economic growth beginning in the early 1950s, and industrial production doubled from 1950 to 1957, and gross national product grew at a rate of 9 or 10% per year, and providing the engine for economic growth that was needed of all of Western Europe. Labor union were supporting the new policies with postponed wage increases, minimized strikes, and support for technological modernization, and a policy of co-determination, which involved a satisfactory grievance resolution system, which was requiring presentation of workers on the boards of large corporations, having workers on these boards so that it wouldn't become a monopoly, and that the workers would get fair shares, fair pay, etc. The recovery was accelerated by the currency reform of June 1948, which we're about to talk about. The U.S. gifts of $1.4 billion as a part of the Marshall Plan, the breaking down of old trade barriers and the traditional practices, and the opening of a global market in Germany. West Germany gained legitimacy and respect as it shed the horrible reputation Germany had gained under the Nazis. West Germany played a central role in the creation of European cooperation. It joined NATO in 1955 and it was founding member of the European Economic Community in 1958. So that 1948 currency reform, let's talk about that. The most dramatic and successful policy event of the Cold War in Germany was the currency reform of 1948. Since the 1930s, prices and wages had been controlled. That meant that the people had accumulated large paper assets, and the official prices and wages did not reflect reality, as the black market dominated the economy and more than half of all transactions were taking place unofficially. On June 21st, 1948, the Western Allies withdrew the old currency and replaced it with the new Deutsche Mark at the rate of 1 new per 10 old, so it was 1 for 10 conversion rate. This wiped out 90% of government and private debt, as well as private savings. Prices were decontrolled, and the labor unions agreed to accept a 15% wage increase, despite the 25% rise in prices. This resulted in the prices of Germany, exports, products, and etc. being held steady, while profits and earnings from exports soared due to this currency reform. And the currency reforms were simultaneously accepted with the $1.4 billion in aid from the Allies due to the Marshall Plan. and coming from the United States, which was its primary investment. In addition, the Marshall Plan forced German companies, as well as those in all of Western Europe, to modernize their business practices and take account of the international market. Marshall Plan funding helped overcome bottlenecks in the surging economy caused by remaining controls, and the market, due to the Marshall Plan and business reforms, greatly expanded the market for German exports. Overnight, relatively, the consumer goods appeared in stores because they could be sold for realistic prices, emphasizing that the Germans their economy had turned a corner. This success of the currency reform angered the Soviets, who cut off all road, rail, canal links, everything. They cut off all transit to the west, in zones and West Berlin. This was the Berlin Blockade, which lasted from the 24th of June 1948 to the 12th of May 1949. In response, the US and Britain launched an airlift of food and coal and distributed the new currency in West Berlin as well. The city thereby became economically integrated into West Germany. So, there was this significant thing called the Grand Coalition. In 1966, Ludwig Erhard, who is on your left, supported, and Kurt Kleinziger was elected as chancellor by a new alliance combining the two largest parties. The socialist leader, Willy Brandt, was deputy federal chancellor and foreign minister. The Grand Coalition lasted 1966 to 1969, and best known for reducing tensions with the Soviet bloc nations and establishing diplomatic relations with Czechoslovakia, Romania, and Yugoslavia. They combined two of the largest parties, and they worked to really soften the tensions between East and West, as well as reaching out to their neighboring countries and reestablishing diplomatic relations and really improving those. So it was really important, thanks to this Grand Coalition, that they got back on track diplomatically. So there was an economic crisis of the 1970s. After 1973, Germany was hit hard by worldwide economic crisis, and a spy scandal helped stop them from fixing it, which jumped, and the Ruhr region was hardest hit, etc., which was like the coal mines, the steel industry, etc., and they took a sharp decline. The welfare system provided a safety net for the large number of unemployed workers, and many factories reduced their labor force and began to concentrate on high-profit specialty items. After 1990, Ruhr moved into service industries and high technology, cleaning up the heavy air and water pollution, and meanwhile, formerly rural Bavaria became a high-tech center of industry. So these crises really started to spell the end of the Eastern German bloc. A spy scandal forced the Eastern German chancellor, who was remaining as party leader, but he was replaced by Helmut Schmidt, and he served as chancellor from 1974 to 1982. Schmidt continued the Ostpolitik with less enthusiasm. He was less focused on spyware, less focused on infiltration, and he wanted to fix Germany. After 1979, foreign policy issues grew central as the Cold War turned hot again, and the German peace movement mobilized hundreds of thousands of troops, and they created detonators and, mid-range ballistic missiles. Schmidt supported the deployment, but was opposed to the left wing and by Brandt. The pro-business Free Democratic Party had been in coalition with the SPD, which now it changed direction. And so as the consequence, the FDP switched allegiance to the CDU, and Schmidt lost his parliamentary majority in 1982. For the only time in West Germany's history, the government fell on a vote of no confidence. And this kind of caused a lot of trouble for both West Germany and East Germany, as there was these distrust and economic crises going on. But eventually this would lead to something that would be very good for the nation, and it would be reunification. So reunification came after lots of years of being separated, and during the summer of 1989, rapid changes known as Peaceful Revolution, or Die Wende, took place in East Germany, which quickly led to German reunification. Growing numbers of East Germans immigrated to West Germany, many via Hungary after Hungary's reformist government opened its borders, and Thousands of East Germans also tried to reach the West by staging sit-ins at West German diplomatic facilities in other East European capitals, most notably in Prague. The exodus generated demands within East Germany for political change, and mass demonstrations in several cities continued to grow as they decided that it was finally time to get rid of this Soviet East German dictatorship. Unable to stop the growing civil unrest, Erich Honecker, who we talked about earlier, who was the party leader of East Germany, was forced to resign in October. And on the 9th of November, East German authorities unexpectedly allowed East German citizens to enter West Berlin and West Germany. Hundreds of thousands of people took advantage of the opportunity. New crossing points were opened in the Berlin Wall and along the border with the West Germany. This led to the acceleration of the process of reforms in East Germany that ended with the German Reunification that came in force on October 3rd, 1990. And on your left there, you can see people demonstrating on the Berlin Wall and how they wanted it to come down. And, you know, Ronald Reagan gave his famous speech, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." And so eventually the wall did come down. And there, you can see videos online of just how happy, overjoyed these people are. And they take sledgehammers, wherever they can get their hands on, and they just start tearing pieces in the wall. And the East German guards are forced to stand there and do nothing. And eventually, you can see families, friends reunite in this beautiful reunification of the German state, back into one German state. So, that kind of ends here. I mean, that brings us to modern day Germany, which you can see the map of its states and borders on your screen there. And that's modern day German. That's the modern day German state. And thank you so much for coming on this adventure with me as we traveled through the ages. This has been the Shield Brother with the History Armada, with our history of the Germanic States, now in modern day Germany. And as always, I'll catch y'all next time.